Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome back to Knights of the Nerds Table. I'm your host and DC expert EJ, and today we're going to talk about the return of Henry Cavill to his role as Superman and his journey so far in the DCEU, or DCU at this point. Now before we grab our red and blue tights and dive into the story behind the last son of Krypton, this video will contain some spoilers for Black Adam. So if you haven't watched this rock-led blockbuster quite yet, go watch that first before viewing this video. Let's get into it. So many people don't know this, but Henry Cavill's journey as Superman actually begins in 2005, when he auditioned for director Bryan Singer's Superman Returns. The role would eventually go to Brandon Routh. Unfortunately for Cavill, this time of his career was characterized as a lot of almost landed roles. He would narrowly miss out on the role of Batman for Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, losing it to Christian Bale. Daniel Craig would beat him out for the part of James Bond, and Robert Pattinson would best him out for the roles of Edward Cullen in Twilight and Cedric Diggory in Harry Potter, respectively. Thankfully, Cavill chalked the losses up to showbiz and landed the role of Charles Brandon in the series The Tudors. As it turns out, not landing the role of Superman in the first time around proved to be a blessing. Although I think Brandon Routh is a fantastic Supes, his movie leaned way too much into the nostalgia of the Christopher Reeves era and just didn't have enough action for a modern blockbuster. It bored fans and critics alike, leaving Superman as an IP in disarray. So much so that Warner Brothers began to wonder if Superman was even relevant anymore in the 21st century. Looking back at this time, it's so crazy how different the Hollywood and comic book movie landscape was. Marvel was just kicking off in phase 1, and DC was trying their best to get their footing with superheroes not named Batman. Sure, Nolan's Batman was killing it and setting the tone and standard for what DC could accomplish on the big screen, but Christopher Nolan insisted that universe be self-contained. Everything DC, besides Batman, was struggling back in those days. Warner Brothers tried to kick off a cinematic universe on the back of Ryan Reynolds' Green Lantern, but that movie flopped so hard at the box office and just became an example of what a bad comic book movie looks like. As previously stated, Brandon Routh's Superman failed to take off as well. So as the Dark Knight trilogy came to a close, Warner Brothers was looking to invest in their legacy IP characters, and they wanted to start with Superman. Nolan didn't want to direct the Superman reboot himself, but he recommended his close friend Zack Snyder to direct. At the time, Snyder was fresh off successful comic book adaptations of Watchmen and 300. When he learned that the role of Clark Kent was up for grabs again, Henry Cavill knew he had to give it another shot. His competition was pretty stiff, with Joe Manganiello, Armie Hammer, Ian Somerhalder, and Matthew Goode all lobbying to play the Man of Steel. But in the end, Nolan and Snyder loved Cavill, and he was cast as the all-American Boy Scout Superman. The film titled Man of Steel was highly anticipated. I actually remember watching the first teaser for this movie. I was watching The Dark Knight Rises in theaters, and I was immediately hooked by the trailer shown beforehand. Sure, like everyone else, I was enjoying the sitcom-flavored MCU. I'm a DC fan at heart. I wanted a grounded take from my Supes, and I had extreme confidence in a movie with Nolan's influence. Man of Steel arrived in theaters in 2013, and I completely fell in love with Cavill's performance, the film's mythology, and Snyder's directing style. The film approaches Superman as an undocumented immigrant, someone who is unsure of what Superman is truly supposed to be, a fish out of water tale, with this god among humans trying to find his footing and his place in society. Most of the critiques of this film are of the strong decision to show Superman not doing much to prevent collateral damage and Soup snapping the neck of Zod. But most people agree that Cavill was a welcome addition to the legacy of Superman. One thing this film gets accused of, which I think is insanity, is that it lacks joy and tenderness. Anyone who says this to me, I just assume wasn't paying attention to the film. The moment with Jonathan Kent, played by Kevin Costner, comforting his son as he realizes that he's an alien is deeply moving. Martha Kent grounds Clark and gives him a strong link to humanity that is felt throughout the film. The scenes with young Clark at school and the scene where Clark tells her he finally figures out his lineage sticks out to me in particular as strong scenes showing his humanity. And as far as joy goes, I dare anyone to watch the first flight scene with Superman as he zooms across the world, smiles to the camera with that Hans Zimmer score just burning up in the background, and tell me that this movie lacks heart. I get it, I know. Despite my enthusiasm, the movie had mixed reviews with a 56% score on Rotten Tomatoes with critics, but a 75% score with audiences. And with that, Henry Cavill became a household name. Regardless of the lukewarm reception to Man of Steel, the movie did gross $668 million at the box office. That number was enough to give Warner Brothers the go-ahead to build out their cinematic universe off this movie. A follow-up to Man of Steel was entitled Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. This movie delved even deeper into deconstruction philosophy with Superman, with him coming to terms with the destruction that comes with his heroism. With new eyes on our hero, he is challenged by the media, politicians, and of course, Ben Affleck's Batman and Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. I expressed my love for this movie in our top rankings, but this movie was panned by critics. This is the movie where Cavill gets some of the bad rap because of the overall negative reaction to this film. His personal arc about his confusion in his place in the world is completed within this film. After a showdown with Batman, followed by an epic fight against Doomsday, Superman gives his life for the planet. He finally realizes that his place in the world is being the hero and making sure he still keeps his connection with humanity. His death drives the world into chaos and leaves it defenseless from outside enemies. More important narratively, it inspires Batman and Wonder Woman to recruit for the Justice League. We've already gone through the craziness and the wackiness that is the theatrical cut of Justice League. Cavill once again got the raw end of the deal. It finally gave audiences a more jolly gee shucks Superman once he was risen from the dead, but because of the extensive reshoots with replacement director Joss Whedon, Cavill was unable to shave his Mission Impossible mustache for his additional Justice League scenes. They had to remove it in post-production, and the result is an absolute mess. You can see Superman's upper lip giving the audience an uncanny valley level of comfort. Very few people remember his more upbeat supes. Most people remember this facial tragedy known as Mustache Gate. Because of the collapse of the Justice League movie, Warner Brothers was unsure of where to go next with Superman. Apparently, there were plans underway to remove Henry Cavill as Superman and Ben Affleck as Batman. Cavill, for his part, tried to get things going. Henry, along with his Mission Impossible director Christopher McQuarrie, pitched a Man of Steel follow-up to Warner Brothers back in 2017. Their version was said to continue the arc of the tonal shift with a more upbeat Superman and was rumored to introduce the Green Lanterns, but Warner Brothers wasn't interested. In 2018, talks fell through between Cavill and the studio. Warner Brothers wanted to sign Cavill up for cameos rather than give him a full movie. At this point of his career, Cavill felt that he had kind of made it. He had already starred in other movies since his Superman outings, and so he felt that he was worth a full studio contract. Because they were not able to come to an agreement, Warner Brothers just went ahead and dropped Cavill. It was reported in the trade soon afterwards that Cavill was done playing Superman. Superman would make 2 appearances during this dark age. In Shazam, Superman shows up briefly, but you don't get to see his face, so it can conceal who the actor is, since the studio wasn't sure what to do with Superman. A similar appearance of Superman shows up in James Gunn's Peacemaker television series, where Superman is just a shadow and you never see the actor's face. Once again, a headless silhouette. This was an absolute embarrassment to the studio, with multiple directors saying they didn't even know who was playing Superman. What? This was infuriating to DC fans, since DC rivals Marvel easily kept on to talent and gave their fans special cameos for characters that were literally in other universes, like Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. It was just a sign of how incompetent the studio was at that time. Another report leaked that Warner Brothers had intended to just completely erase both Cavill and Affleck from the timeline in the Flash movie and just replace them with Supergirl and Batgirl respectively. It seemed like Cavill was destined to depart from the role, but his agent Danny Garcia assured fans that the cape was still in the closet. While this is going on, 2 unique phenomenons were occurring. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was struggling to get his Black Adam movie off the ground and prioritized. His biggest request is that he wanted Henry Cavill to cameo as Superman in the movie to tease Black Adam's and Kal-El's rivalry. But the studio head at the time, Walter Hamada, was firm about kicking Cavill out of the universe, to the frustration of Johnson. In addition to the prodding from Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the Release the Snyder Cut movement was also pushing for a Henry return. Tweets started to go out appreciating aspects of Henry Cavill's character that had been kind of overlooked. YouTube videos started trending, revisiting the character and bringing more attention to the kind of complexity that Henry Cavill brought to the role. It seemed that during this time of the empty suit Superman, calls for Cavill's return were more amplified than ever. Cavill's relationship with the Snyder movement is a bit lukewarm. When asked in interviews if he wanted Warner Bros. To release the Snyder Cut, he would hint that he would rather look to the future than revisit this Justice League film. Regardless, things intensified once the Snyder Cut was announced to be officially released on HBO Max. To promote the movie, Henry Cavill did a brief Q&A session at DC Fandom in 2020, where he chatted about Superman's role in the movie. This was huge, as this was the first time that he had done anything for the character since 2017. Narratively, the Snyder Cut gave Henry Cavill a bit more to do once he rises from the dead. He has a tender moment with Lois and Martha Kent, rose from the Fortress of Solitude with an epic voiceover from both of his fathers, and helps the Justice League put down Steppenwolf for good. Zack Snyder's Justice League does hint to a future Nightmare timeline, where Soup succumbs to the anti-life equation and becomes a servant of Darkseid, further hinting to a darker take on the character. But besides that, his Superman seems refreshed by his resurrection, ready for the other members of the Justice League to join him in the sun. Regardless of more positive feelings about Cavill and The Rock's persistence, the studio and Hamada insisted on Cavill staying out. But things changed in 2022. The biggest change was a merger with Warner Brothers and Discovery, which removed much of the leadership blocking Cavill's return. In July, during Comic-Con, there was a rumor leaked that Cavill was supposed to show up on the DC panel to discuss the future of Superman. Even Deadline reported on this story. This leak ended up being false with no Henry Cavill appearance, and this caused extreme fan backlash online and boos at SDCC. Personally, I think The Rock was playing 3D chess and leaked that false report on purpose just for Warner Brothers to see the demand for Cavill's Kal-El. With this extra motivation, agent Danny Garcia, who manages both Henry Cavill and her ex-husband Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, was finally able to negotiate Cavill's return in a post-credit scene in Black Adam. After a long road, Supes was finally back in the House of DC, with The Rock telling him, "Welcome home."
Master Kent, you said you'd come.
Currently, Cavill does not have an actual contract. We do not know what this next Superman will entail. Right now, Warner Brothers is listening to different pitches for what could be Man of Steel 2. Plenty of questions about this film.
I have a second chance, Lo. I am not gonna waste it.
Who will direct? Christopher McQuarrie is a name that's been floated. David Yates, who directed the last 4 in the Harry Potter franchise, has also been proposed as a favorite. And of course, no matter how busy he is at Netflix, there will be many, myself included, who want to see Zachary Edward Snyder return to direct Man of Steel 2. With DC now being led by Zack Snyder's professional friend James Gunn, it's more likely than ever that we could see some type of return for the director to DC. Gunn mentioned 5 superheroes that he felt DC needed to focus on to be successful. He mentioned Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Harley Quinn, and of course, Superman. Let's hope Gunn means that. Also, does this mean the return of Man of Steel favorites such as Amy Adams' Lois Lane, Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor, and Lawrence Fishburne's Perry White? Will it be just a Rock vs. Superman movie or a true sequel to Man of Steel? Who is the villain? Zack Snyder hinted that he wanted fan favorite villain Brainiac to be in the sequel of Man of Steel. Will they continue that? Only time will tell, but it looks like we will most likely not be getting a Superman story until 2025. But one thing is for certain, Henry Cavill's journey as the Man of Steel is now fully supported by fans and the studio. It's a rare W that DC fans can relish. All we can hope for is truth, justice, and a better tomorrow for our Clark Kent. Cavill is Kal-El. Thanks for tuning in and watching our video. Are you a fan of Henry Cavill's Superman? What do you think of his journey so far? What would you like to see in the next Man of Steel? Tell us below in the comments. As always, like and subscribe to our channel for more content and connect with us on our many socials. I look forward to chatting more about Henry Cavill in the future. Just like his tribute says in BVS, if you seek his monument, look around. Night out.